Right, good afternoon, everybody. This is our third in our series of 2020 Vision for the Future. And like I said, it's the third edition. This is looking at Black history from a sociological perspective. Last week, we looked at things from a historical perspective, and the week before that, which is our first week, we looked at things from a educational perspective. So what this session will entail will be the following. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the sociology of race. That means how race is constructed within society. And we're literally going to look at race construction over the past 500 years. This is what we're going to be doing. We're going to look at the Eurocentric philosophy and what Eurocentrism means and how it came about, what type of philosophical approaches and methods and principles is used in order to construct race. We're going to have a few breaks today, as you already know. I usually give about 2 to 3 breaks. The second part will look at struggle, resistance, and activism. So that's going to be looking at the slave trade. That's going to be looking at what takes place after the slave trade, not just in Britain or in the Caribbean, but also in North America. So there's going to be amalgamation, basically, of what takes place in North America and the Caribbean islands. Because one of the unfortunate realities in this society is that if you ask the average person about Black history, they can tell you a hell of a lot about United States of America or North America, and very little about the Caribbean islands, even though Britain had actually colonized the Caribbean islands, which actually shows that we didn't get our independence in the 1960s, which means there's this form of dislocation between British people and people of the Caribbean as far as this historical connectiveness is concerned. So I'm going to be looking at the American experience as well as the Caribbean experience. And then if we get time, we'll look at certain terminologies and meanings, which will take place throughout the presentation, really, not necessarily at the end. So let me make a start. So Asa Iliad, who is a chematologist, he's a historian, and he was also educational consultant, psychologist, etc., that focused on education of Black people within the Western world. This is what he did. So the thing about it is that Asa Iliad, let me just go back. Asa Iliad had said this: there is something dreadfully wrong with an educational socialization process that leaves us ignorant of our past, strangers of our people, and apes of our oppressors. So there's a couple of things to highlight here. There is something dreadfully wrong with an education socialization process. What he's talking about here is looking at the educational system. And the other thing is how the educational system socializes us along with the way we are socialized within our own homes. So what is important here, if we're looking at ourselves as Black people or a collective group or Africans or former slaves or whatever the case may be, one of the things is that we have to acknowledge this reality and we have to teach it to the next generation so they understand why they're in the position they're in today, why there's so much disadvantages for Black people within the Western world. There's a historical reason for this. And if you don't understand the historical past, you will not understand the historical present. History is not about events and things that took place in the past. No, history has a linear type of attitude. It gives us some sort of idea of what took place in the past, in why we are in the way we are today. This is what history is about. It's not based upon just facts. It's based upon understanding, appreciating, evaluating, assessing, all these different things that comes about, because the present is a mushroom of events that took place in the past. So he also goes on to say that if we're not educated or socialized properly, it will leave us ignorant of our past. And the whole point of history, it's about memory. That's what history exactly is. It's about memory. It's looking at things which took place before in our parents' generation, grandparents' generation, etc., etc. And this is how this all really comes about. So if you don't know about your past, okay, you are basically ignorant of it. And if you're ignorant of the past, you're strangers to your own people or to people you've interacted with. And this is the problem. A lot of people which grow up in this country, like the West, are unaware of the relationship they've had with Black people during the enslavement period. They're also unaware of the Black presence in Britain in the Tudor period, the Stewart period. This is during the Elizabethan period, during the times of the Charleses, Charles I, Charles II, the Georges that came later on in the 1700s, and so on and so forth. And this is what has happened with Britain. Britain has left their population very ignorant about their past. This is why, if you look at industrialization, for instance, they could not have had industrialization if it wasn't for the free labor or enslavement. This is a fact, because they had to get their wealth from somewhere. They weren't receiving their wealth from collection plates on a Sunday. Let's be realistic about this reality. It was through forced labor, forced migration of people who were literally worked to death, and basically their labor was owned. Their minerals was owned, their commodities were owned, their resources were owned, and they were resources themselves. And this is what has to be understood about the reality of the past. So, ignorant of our past, strangers to our people, and then apes of our oppressors, where we were put down to become nothing more than mere animals for about 300 years. And unfortunately, many people are still got this concept that dark skinned people, black people, or people from the African continent are animalistic in the way they conduct themselves. So let's have a look at some evidences about aping around animals, etc., etc. If you look on the left-hand side, you've got the likes of LeBron James. Now, LeBron James is a basketball player, and he's with a model. He's the first Black person that appeared on the front of Vogue, okay? Vogue magazine, a very popular magazine in United States of America. So there you got LeBron James, all dressed in black, basically black shorts, black and white boots or basketball boots with a basketball in his hand, which he's bouncing, okay? His mouth is open wide. But let's have a look at semiotics now, semiology. Let's have a look at the signs and symbols which this popular magazine that is advertising or presenting a famous Black celebrity on the front cover. And let's see the type of ridicule which is being made, which is right in front of us. And I'm going to try to show you how semiotic works. Semiotics is based upon reading signs. It's also looking at the way in which people are placed on billboards or through magazines, on presentations, advertisements, marketing, and all these different types of things. And there's three components that go along with this. You have text, you have subjects, you have objects. Subjects are people, objects are things. So let's have a look and break this down. And on the right-hand side, as you can see LeBron James. He sat there on a high chair, and there's a white woman, a model, all dressed in white. So you've got the black-white contrast, okay? The black-white contrast. So let's read these signs. So let's have a look. Now, when this image first came out, African Americans knew exactly who this image was supposed to represent. And this was so-called King Kong. On the right-hand side, you can see the gorilla or the monkey with his mouth wide open, holding or clasping a white female. Okay, so this is King Kong. Kong actually comes from the word Congo. And we know about Otto Benga. Otto Benga was a person who was known as the evolutionary link between ape and man. This Black individual was locked in a zoo, I think it was the Bronx Zoo, at the turn of the 20th century, where he was defecating and urinating in front of white spectators, okay? This is what was believed in the 19th century. So any image of apes or monkeys or gorillas that came on television at that time was a clear representation of Black people. This is what must be understood. The theory of evolution that Charles Darwin had constructed in the 1800s now became a play within scientific circles within the Western world, especially the United States of America. And the actual character of King Kong was based upon Jack Johnson. Jack Johnson was the first Black heavyweight champion of the world. And not just that, this individual, Jack Johnson, had the audacity during his time during the turn of the 20th century to not only knock out his white opponents and give black people a self-esteem and confidence, he also was able to marry white women, and no one could do nothing about it, even though majority of the states had what was known as miscegenation laws. Miscegenation laws are basically whereby black men couldn't marry white women or vice versa. People from different races was not allowed to get married, which meant that exogamy, mixed marriages, was illegal in majority, if not all the states within United States of America. So this is what happened. So he was able to get away with certain things. And that is who King Kong, the movie, is based upon. Because King Kong, the movie, doesn't start in the jungle. It starts in Madison Square Gardens. And that was where Jack Johnson became the heavyweight champion. That's who Jack Johnson was this gorilla. This is what they would do. This is what they were doing in movies, okay? So what comes out of this experience, as you know, if you know the film that came out in the 1930s about King Kong, he climbs the building with this white woman on his hand, and obviously the 4 airplanes come. This is about the apocalypse, okay? The horsemen, the 4 horsemen that come from the 4 corners of the earth to destroy the devil, the evil one, which is written in Revelations. And the concept of King Kong climbing up the building with this white woman is a symbol of upward mobility, is wealth. And they shoot him and kill him, which means even if you have a white woman on your hand, you are not going to reach the top. And is obviously the Empire State Building. So all the symbolism is in the film. This is what it is. You are not, even as a black man, even though you're wealthy, you are not going to gain upward mobility in a white society with a white woman alongside you, as long as we can help it. We will shoot you down, okay? And she will stay alive, which means that the white female will then inherit the wealth. This is what this sort of symbolism is in the movies. But let's have a look now on the left-hand side, and let's have a look at the contrasts and similarities with the picture. So here, you look at LeBron James, he's slightly taller than the white female who's in his left arm on the image on the left-hand side. Height denotes power in semiotics. Usually the person who's standing on the left is the most powerful one. If you know how the film industry works, the main character of the dialogue is usually on the left-hand side of the screen. This is how it works. It's usually on the left-hand side of the screen, not the right. So the main character, the main dialogue, the main person is usually on the left-hand side of the screen. So because he is on the left-hand side, they have to demean him in some way. And this is how they do it. So if you look on top, if you look at the word Vogue, they've made sure they've put in between the O and the G, which means he got like devil's horns behind it. This is a subtle way that marketers who are racist or got discriminatory practices, this is how they view us psychologically, and they put it within images and advertisements, yeah, on billboards. And they're always prejudicial in some way or another. So you can see there's horns behind his head. This is what they've done. Next, if you look on the left-hand side, you've got this gorilla, King Kong, the cartoon caricature. He's got a bat with culture, which is written in German. Okay, which is written in German. This is German for culture, where he's going to use a baton to beat or to bash people. On LeBron James's side, there's a basketball. And what that is saying is that Black culture is based upon playing, sport, entertainment, not their intellectual development. And this is why the educational system perpetuates this by expelling a lot of Black children from school, disproportionately more than any other children. We were not brought to United States of America or Britain for any other purpose but to work. And this is true. If you know history carefully, you'll know when we were brought to the Americas, we were brought there to work, not to be educated. And when they asked after the post-war era, when this country was damaged by German warfare through the amount of bombings that took place up until 1945, 3 years later, 3 to 4 years later, they asked for my people from the Caribbean to come here to rebuild the country, not to come here to be educated, to rebuild it, to work. This has been the relationship between white people in the West and Black people living in the West as far as their relationship is concerned. We are here to serve white people or Europeans. This is what it's about. And history testifies to this. So when we're having a rough time within many different institutions, or especially the institution like education, is because we weren't brought here to be educated. So this is what they're saying. So the ball here, all they want to do is play. They're not going to grow up. You know, they're big boys. They're not quite men. This is what they're basically saying. If you notice, he's bouncing the ball. Okay, so they're trying to highlight the ball here. It's not in his hand. Okay, this is what is important here. Have a look at the mouth. Is identical. They have told LeBron James to open his mouth just like the gorilla in this particular image, which is on the right-hand side. So it's clear where they got the image from and what they're trying to replicate here. So let me just go back again and just have a look at some words now. So here, if you can look, just under the chin of LeBron James, they got the word perfect fit, okay, with a capital P and a capital F. But what I want you to do, are they talking about perfect fit with this advertisement here, perfect fit, dressing for every shape from size 0 to 16, or is there a perfect fit that he fits as a devil? This is what they do. And because they like to ridicule Black people as being apes and monkeys and gorillas, let's have a look at here now. They got the word between his legs, okay? Shape issues. But if you take off the S and the H, you got the word ape here. These are subtle digs. And this is the thing with people. People sometimes don't know how to read signs, because before they put this out on the stands, one of the things they had to do, approximately between 7 to maybe 20 different people sat on the table and looked at all these different pictures and designs. This is the one they chose. This is the one they agreed on. This was the one which had the largest consensus. So there had to have been mimical things within here to project negativity as far as Black masculinity or Black males are concerned, okay? And this is how, and I can show you many, many other images similar to this, but this is just one. And this is when the Black community in America and in the Caribbean started to complain about this, because they knew who it was straight away. The people of Vogue were trying to say, no, you're reading more into it and racism doesn't exist and this is not the case and all this other nonsense. When we know the philosophy of the theory of evolution, where they believe that Black people evolved from apes, was very much part of the British or the Western mentality. This is, I think, is something for us to acknowledge and understand. So you got ape written there, okay? This is no accident. There's no accident, because this advertisement here could have been put for the next month's edition or the edition before, okay? There's a lot of advertising, but they select which forms of advertisements are going to go in this particular edition. And this is what they decided to choose, okay? This is what they decided to choose. So let's have a look at the construction of race. Now, race, as far as going back as the 1500s was concerned, was considered a biological and a physiological or physical specification, okay? But we now know with genetic evidence that this is not the case. You know, a person who has a chest who's Black, their chest is exactly the same whether they're white, yellow, red, or brown. There's no difference except for the dimensions, the size, etc., etc. So what has happened through genetic evidence, especially with Rebecca Kahn's findings in the late 1980s, that we all descended from one woman that lived in Africa approximately 90,000 to 200,000 years ago. We all come from one. This is the monogenetic fact. We all come from one gene or gene pool, not the polygenetic thing in which a lot of Western scientists who were evolutionists were trying to say, that there was a Mongoloid race, a European race, which was white, and a Black race. And they all have their own origins in different places. Genetics, DNA doesn't support this. This is blowing this out of the water. So race is a social construct. There's only one race, a human, which is the human race. There is differences in phenotype. Phenotype is looking at nose and tongues and lips and eyes and all these other type of things. And morphology looks at color, you know, looks at color, shape, and texture. That's what morphology is, and I'll break these things down. So Stewart Hall, who's a Jamaican sociologist who died a few years ago, he was one which revolutionized cultural studies within Britain in Birmingham University. This is what this man did. He revolutionized, and he's one of the leading person to run his own department successfully. This person, Stewart Hall. Now, when he looks at race, he gave a presentation about race being a floating signifier. And what does he mean by race being a floating signifier, especially since the 1500s? Well, as a floating signifier, it basically means that these subject areas here on the left-hand side, okay, which is theology, philosophy, science, mainly biology, anthropology, psychology, and sociology, was disciplines, or rather subjects, which were used to justify racial discrimination within the Western world, which would happen during slavery and after slavery. Now, so if you look at the theological aspect, they talk about the curse of Ham, where Ham is the father of the black race. He's supposed to have looked on the nakedness of Noah, and Noah said that his descendants would be cursed. But the reality is that if the Bible is read carefully, it says, cursed be Canaan. Canaan is Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, not Ham. People read things into it which wasn't actually there. But it was a stigma towards that people that took place in antiquity. And this was what was taught during slavery, that we were the cursed children of Ham, and we should enjoy our enslavement, etc., because we looked at the nakedness of a prophet of God. This is what was being taught during slavery. Okay, so I think it's important for us to know that the Western society, as soon as the Moors were defeated in Spain in 1492, we moved from the word Moor to Negro. Negro is a created construct, a broken. This is why we got rid of that terminology in the 1960s. It was still floating around in the early 70s when I went to school, but that's why we gave up that identification or identifier. So theology is the first one. And then philosophy came, the likes of Hume, David Hume, Charles Montesquieu, all had their say about dark-skinned people, being savages, being primitive, being backwards, etc., etc. So what they started doing, they started to characterize us, look at our characters, our personality, and try to demean us. This is what they refer to as defamation, to defame us, to move us from our humanity. And then science became used. And if you read a book, which is by, I can't remember the first name, her name is Washington. And she wrote a book called Medical Apartheid, by the amount of experimentation that took place not in North America and some parts of the Caribbean islands by white doctors, literally, where black people were used as samples or specimens for experimentation, usually with no anesthetic, no antiseptic being used, and being cut up while they were still alive. It's about 300 to 400 pages. It's a good book to read. And you can see the justification they were using in order to look at different organs, in order to try to prove the inferiority of dark-skinned people from a biological construct. Then anthropology became another thing. Anthropology is just a study of cultures or people, mainly the study of people, okay, anthropology. And the first anthropologists were colonial administrators. And then it was taken to the academies, where Europeans were going in, especially the British, were going into certain areas, wanted to know about the people. They would send colonial administrators in to observe the people so they know how to rule them in a more sophisticated way or sophisticated manner. And this is what anthropology was used for. And then we started to see around about the 1800s, psychology being used. And they started to use things like the skull of the black person is small, so therefore he must have a smaller brain. Therefore, he is intellectually inferior. This is intrinsic and embedded within Western culture, Western society. Even if you want to call it Western civilization, whereby no one is civil when they look at these type of arguments. And then you look at the aspect of sociology, where they had to look at the interactive mechanisms that took place between black and white people, and the reason and the inferiority complex that took place. Now, one of the things I will try to emphasize here is that the Western system is a dual system. In other words, there's a system for whites and a system for blacks. And we know this. In education, you hardly see any black teachers within the educational system, and black people are proportionally kicked out of the educational system. And this is a human rights violation, but this is allowed to happen within the British society. And no one and the governments don't do nothing about this. This is a violation of Article 27 of the United Nations Convention. If a people develop a country and a society, they're supposed to be part of it. So why are we not in the curriculum? This is this is international law that Britain is a signature to. America is a signature to. Okay, they add a signature to this, and they are denying us our rights within the different institutions, especially the educational institutions. So they don't really practice what they preach, and this is what comes out of this. And I think this is important for us to acknowledge as we go through the ages and go through all the different experiences that Black and white people have had. We live in a Jew society. The legal system is against us. It's more favorable for the white. We know this, majority of the time. It's only 3 weeks ago that a barrister, I can't remember her name, a Black female barrister, was humiliated on her job by a clerk and by a judge and by another member of staff, security staff, seeing her as a criminal when this is a barrister. So the Black symbolism, like you said, like Stewart Hall said, is a floating signifier. There's a signifier within many white minds of criminality when it comes with Black people, uneducated. All they want to do is sing and dance. These are things that are perpetuated and reinforced through images, through the media, and obviously through Western culture, because that is the foundation of Western culture. Western culture built itself during the enslavement period, and they made sure that Black people during that time were nothing more than social pariahs. They were seen as being insignificant. This is why we should not use the word minorities. We are not a minority as a people, because the word minority comes from the word minor, which means insignificant. Why would I want to call myself insignificant? And I do not want to call myself a majority because I'm not major, I'm not important. I'm just like everyone else. But I value who I am, we value who we are, and we should see ourselves alongside other people. This superior inferiority complex came out of the dual system perspective of Western colonization of the Americas, and then later Australia and New Zealand and Canada and all these other places, and then later on within the Caribbeans. This is how these things come out. So this is W.E.B. Du Bois on the left-hand side, a Black intellectual, the first Black person to receive a PhD at Harvard University, the first at Harvard University. And he wrote an excellent book. I think it was between 1904 to 1909. It was called Souls of the Black Folk. This is what the book was called. And he talks about, he's got a chapter called The Conservation of the Races. And one of the main quotations that W.E. Du Bois put forward is this: the problem of the 20th century is the color line. The color is going to be an issue of the 20th century. And this was at the turn of the 20th century that he said this. And so we can honestly say that the problem of the 21st century is going to be a color line. Because for the last maybe 15 or 10 years, 10, 15 years, we've had the dominant culture try to convince us that racism had ended. They can't give us a date, a month or the year when it's supposed to have ended, but it was supposed to have ended. Okay, ended in what way? And look what's happened in the last 5 to 6 months now with the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's all these companies who's looking for training, because when they abolished the Commission for Racial Equality in 2007, which came out as a Racial Relation Act of 1976, what happened was the Equalities, I think it's called the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, decided to take over. Okay, and what took place after that in 2007, race was either put at the back of the stove or put in the oven and the oven door closed. And they started to deal with other minority issues, which was important, but they excluded race from that discourse. The LGBTQ became of importance. White female gender issues became important. Disabilities came important. Special educational needs came important, as well as mental health came important. And the majority of the people which fell into that category were white people. This is what came out of this convention. And when they decided to eliminate race from the discourse. And we know what took place in Wales, if those of you came from Wales, that after 2007, they shut down two major organizations that dealt with racial problems within Wales. BVSNW, which was down in Buttown Docks in Cardiff. The Black Voluntary Sector Network Wales was shut down and it was no longer funded. And Surrec in Newport was also shut down because what they were saying, we don't need to deal with race now. We're not going to fund racial discrimination issues because race is over. This is what happened. And look what's happened now. So the reality is that race was literally put into the closet. Here, these are the things that W.E.B. Du Bois focuses on. He said one of the fascinations with Europeans, the 1800s, the 19th century, and the 20th century was skin, bone, and hair, which was the phenotype. People's skin color, their bone composition, looking at skulls, etc., and then looking at the texture of their hair. This is what Europeans became fascinated with at the turn of the 20th century. Looking at people's skin color, their bone shapes, mainly their skulls, and looking at the texture of their hair. So let's have a look at some of the things that W.E.B. Du Bois says in his book. Although the wonderful development of humans, history teaches that the grosser physical differences of color, hair, and bone go but a short way towards explaining the different roles which groups of men have played in human progress. So what it means that when we focus on skin, bone, and hair, it doesn't tell us anything about what the person actually do within society. So what happened was racial superiority came about just by looking at someone's appearance, not people's works. And this was unfortunate. And they tried to use science in a way to try to justify this. So this is what he's saying. He also goes on to say that color does not agree with texture of hair. For many of the dark races have straight hair, okay? Nor does color agree with the breadth of the head. For the yellow Tatars has broader heads or head than the German, okay? So it blows the superiority out of the water. We have at least two or perhaps three great families of human beings, the whites, the Negroes, because that's what we were called at the time, with a small n, okay? That's not a spelling mistake, because Negro was spelled with the small n. We were not considered human beings, especially after 1776, the three-fifths compromise. We were only 3/5 of a human. We didn't become human until I don't know when. I don't know any convention that has taken place that has made Black people humans. And maybe that is why there's so much police brutality taking place upon dark-skinned people in the Western Hemisphere, especially in the United States of America and in Britain. We are disproportionately stopped than any other ethnic group on the planet. So if you honestly think that the society in which British or white Americans live in are not going to be affecting their judgment, their perception, and their concept towards dark-skinned people, we need to go back to the drawing board. Because the reality is, these realities are intrinsic to the development of European people in the Western world. There is no doubt about this. Then he goes on to say, what then is race? It's a vast family of human beings, generally of common blood and language, always a common history, tradition, and impulses, who are both voluntarily and involuntarily striving together for the accomplishment of certain more or less vividly conceived ideals of life. So we're all after the same thing: food, clothing, and shelter. It's about survival. So when you bring in inferiority and superiority into the equation, you're looking to cause inequalities and different forms of social stratifications. So even if you look at the human activities in which Blacks and whites engage in, we know if we look at education, we know who's at the top of the education, whether they are teachers or pupils. If we look at the economic situation, we know who benefits more from the economy. If we look at the entertainment industry, we know which race of people benefit from the entertainment industry. When we look at the labor industry, we know who's benefiting. Okay, when we look at the legal system, the political system, even from the religious system, etc., we know who's benefit. It's lighter-skinned people, and this is by design. This is by design, and this is what I mean. It's in every facet of institution within the Western world. There are some people who's trying to break that, yeah, okay? But for people to walk around blindly and think that everything is fine because we don't hear name calling like we used to. Prejudicial and discriminatory practice can be mentally, which we cannot see and judge, and it can be emotionally. Just because they're not manifested practically or physically does not mean it does not exist. And that is the problem that the Western world went. Because when Obama was elected, yeah, what was it, about 2009, 2008, 2009? The Western world thought, well, everything is fine now. And you know, that's when in America, there was the intensification of Black males who were unarmed who were being shot. And the amount of so-called Karens, which was coming up on the scene, who were phoning policemen, okay, and trying to indict Black men because they know what the police is going to do. They're not stupid. They know exactly what they're going to do. Policemen, when they are called out, are not going to be speaking nice and counseling Black men. And most Black men were leaving in body bags or not even returning home after these telephone calls were being made. So we have to look at the reality of this. The shooting of Black men and the stop and insertion of Black men goes back as early as 1865. It's not something that turned around since the 60s or just before the 60s. As early as 1865, when Black men in America were no longer held in servitude, okay? They were no longer property. Those police forces or so-called officials that were working for the government were indiscriminately killing them. This is when it began, which means we were more safer when we were property, because you couldn't kill a Black man or a Black woman if they were property, because they belonged to a white planter. So our lives became less than nothing as soon as we came out to become free. As soon as we gained freedom, our lives now were being threatened. And I think we have to understand that this has been a long, long journey. Black people have not been educated. You know, we were denied education for 5 centuries, not since the Windrush generation, since 5 centuries. We were not allowed to read and write. In Jamaica, if you were caught reading and writing, you were executed or you were given 50 to 70 lashes. It was illegal for Black people to be educated. And this is evidence to show you that we weren't brought here to be educated. We weren't brought here for upward mobility. We were brought here to be subordinates and to work for European people. That's what we were brought here for. History testifies to that, okay? The books acknowledge that. We need to substantiate that into our minds. We need to join these dots or put these jigsaw pieces together to see the bigger picture, rather than these jigsaw pieces that the media and all these other people are trying to give us, trying to see a holistic thing in one piece. And we're not doing justice to ourselves when we do that. So this is a Grimaldi skull. He talks about skulls because Westerners, especially British, they had a fascination with measuring skulls, digging up graves and measuring skulls and looking at the size of skulls, especially of Africans, because African skulls are slightly smaller than Europeans, and of Semitic and Mongoloid people, that they must have had a smaller brain. So this was a skull which was found in Europe. This is the oldest African skull found in Europe. This dates back between 50 to 55,000 years, okay? So Africans occupied Europe for about 40,000 years before Europeans emerged. So Europeans emerged during what was known as the Women to Stadio. And I spoke about this in my first lecture. It's on YouTube, okay? But I will just give a little summary here, okay? Between 50 to 55,000 years ago, approximately, there was a place known as the Women to Stadio, the last glaciational period, the last major ice age up in the northern caps of the globe. Africans are caught in this ice. And there's a lack of vitamin D production because there's not enough ultraviolet rays of the sun. under those climatic changes. So what happened was darker skinned people had to attenuate their melanin production. They had to be reduced, is what they call epigenesis, between climate and genes. And manipulation took place for them to reduce the amount of melanin which they were producing. And when they were having children in those regions, this was known as albinism. They were producing albinos or albinos, children, okay, as their progeny, who could live for a longer period of time under those icy conditions. And many Africans have died out as a result of freezing cold, etc., etc. That's how it came about. And when the ice receded and the interglaciational period came, which meant there was a warming, okay? There was sunlight, there was some heat to the sunlight. Africans started to retreat down with a lot of their mixed race or their white-skinned progeny into the equatorial regions. And that is what happens. So we all come from one. So skin color is not about superiority, inferiority. Skin color is about the adaptation of the climatic variation or change that people live in around different environments. So let me just have a look at some of the questions, see if there's any questions for you before I go on. No. If anybody want to pose any questions to me later on, please put at Abu-Bakr so I'm not reading what, because I know some of you are conversating with one another. Harriet Washington, thank you very much for that, Timothy. Yes. A Medical Apartheid is a good book to read. Thank you for that. Stewart Hall also wrote, thank you. You're conversing with one another. So whatever missing links that I do, have conversations, and you know, we're all here to learn at the end of the day, and so am I. Let's have a look. Come on. Right. These are the Khoisan people. These are the oldest people, the oldest genetic link back to mitochondrial Eve. You can see they got yellowish to dark brownish skin. Okay, they got the epicanthic fold over the eye. And this is what the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, this is what they've inherited from these Africans. They inherited from these Africans. You can see the broad nose, the peppercorn hair. Okay, Nelson Mandela is a descendant of these people. These are the oldest people on the planet. Okay, L1. That's a genetic marker. Mitochondrial marker is L1. These South African people are the oldest people on the planet. They possess the oldest genetic markers on the planet in the world. So let's have a look more coming to the contemporary or more to the modern. So we're going to look at Queen Elizabeth now. Queen Elizabeth I. Let's have a look at how our relationship really comes together. So in 1555, the English queendom, okay, began to take interest into the New World voyages and explorations. So what happened was, after the fall of the Moors in 1492, European nations decided to send their so-called privateers or private or buccaneers or whatever names they called them, okay, to bring back commodities, minerals, and resources to European lands. Because Europe had gone through two major bubonic plagues, and they were land poor, resource poor, and people poor. This is important for us to know. So they had to go out on these voyages to try to find food to sustain their nation. This is what I think needs to be known. And this is what brings about the economic revolution, I suppose you can say, within European society, around about the 1500s. And it's how Britain begins. In 1580, Britain responded with the principles of effective occupation. And this is in Eric Williams' book, Capitalism and Slavery. So what this basically is, the edict which took place with Queen Elizabeth, she was saying when she was sending her so-called privateers and pirates out, that if you can occupy land in the Americas, whether it's Central America, South America, the Caribbean islands, North America, Canada, any of those places, if you can occupy those lands, it's effective occupation. In other words, that land now belongs to my queendom, to this country's empire, to this country's commonwealth. Because by that time, Wales came under English hegemony, so was Scotland. Okay, so it's now the United Kingdom. And Ireland, Northern Ireland was taken around about this time as well. So before they went out voyaging and taking other people's lands, they had to consolidate lands within their own borders and create borders, like Wales and Scotland, because we know how the English took over those territories. So the Welsh people who were just speaking in places like Cornwall and London, that was all Welsh lands. They spoke Welsh at one particular time. Okay, the English are the descendants of the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, the Vikings. Okay, that's the people who created England. The Romans, when they came, that's where it really starts. Where it starts, and then the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes come in, and then the Vikings, and then the Normans. That's who they are, the English, and that's how they were able to consolidate Scotland and Wales as being part of the empire. So the empire begins at home before they went out into other places. In 1601, Queen Elizabeth I issued a proclamation saying that Negroes or blackamoors, because that's what we were called Moors. Okay, we were called Moors. Okay, and then we became blackamoors, which meant black as a Moor. It's like saying white as snow. So we know who the Moors were. The Moors were dark-skinned people. But because we lost our territories in the Iberian Peninsula, which is places like what? Spain and Portugal. And then we started moving around and we started settling in different places. Then what started happening? They started to refer to us now as Negroes. We're not Negroes until after 1492. Before 1492, we were Moors. Not even blackamoors, Moors. That's what we were called. Okay, so it goes on to say should be deported. So Negroes and blacks should be deported from England because they were infidels. Infidels meant they were Muslim. This is what they're saying. So we know the origins of Islamophobia now. During the Elizabethan period. Now what happened at 9/11? And this is the problem. People don't study history. You know, there's nothing new under the sun. Most of us has heard these slogans and these phrases, but we don't really know what it means. There's nothing new under the sun. So when we look at Islamophobia now, it's just a repeated tradition from the Elizabethan period. That's all it is. Looking for scapegoats in order to justify their position, their authority, their hegemony, or their control over land, people, and resources. That's all it basically is. And it goes on to say that these infidels, which are talking about Muslims, and unfortunately, it just wasn't Muslims. There was a lot of black and more Christians that lived in Britain at that time, and they were subjected to the same tyranny. So it did identify as skin color at this time. It wasn't just Muslims, it was Muslims to begin with, and those Christian blacks that lived in Elizabethan England or UK or Britain were subjected to that tyranny as well. And the same took place during the Inquisition in 1492, 1493, 1494, the Spanish Inquisition as well. Even Black Christians were subjected to the Inquisitor's blade or stretching machine or whatever type of instrument or apparatus they were using to torture people. This is how this all comes about. So what happens now? These infidels and they were contributing to the economic and social problems. So now scapegoats is taking place within Elizabethan England with these Black people. So our history don't start in slavery. Our history starts before that. Do you know the majority of the Black people that lived in the Elizabethan period were upwardly mobile, they were wealthy, they were rich? Why isn't this in the history books? You would honestly think the way they teach history about the Elizabethan period, that no Blacks were here at all. And then the thing is, archaeological evidence in Wales and Scotland and England showing you that all the oldest skulls, which is in the UK, are skulls that resemble my skull. The first occupants of the British Isles were dark-skinned people. They called them Australoids. Some of them were Australian looking. So when the Australian people, the Aboriginal people, left Africa and beachcombed into Australia, some of their cousins had ended up in the British Isles. Okay, they're finding this information. Do you know this information is being suppressed? It was when I was at Cardiff University and I saw this one room with all this archaeological evidence put there. That's how I found out this information. It was being suppressed. I'm not sure if it was even being taught. And I used those things to create my course, which I refer to as race and genetics, to explain things. The origin of man started in Africa and how it diffused out. And I had to use up to 11 different disciplines to come to the same conclusion of the origin of man being African, not from a superiority inferiority complex, just to emphasize the truth and the evidence of the human family, irrespective of skin color, phenotype, genotype, biology, language, irrespective of all that. We all come from one. And this is what this is about. So we look at the likes of Carl Linnaeus, and this is round about the 1700s now. We're starting to see where they're starting to put characters towards dark-skinned people. So I only want to focus on two here. Homo europaeus, as white, fickle, sanguine, blue-eyed, gentle, and governed by law, meaning they're sophisticated, they are civilized. This is what this man is saying. But the Homo afer, who is black, phlegmatic, cunning, lazy, lustful, careless, and governed by caprice. In other words, he has no regulative element where his emotion and his thought pattern is concerned, where the word capricious comes from. Sudden change in mood and behavior. 1 minute they're like this, next minute they're like that. You don't know where you stand with dark-skinned people. This is what is being said. And this is characterization now, because there's three processes through my research in 30 years, which I began to realize. There's classification that the Europeans have used. Classification means them versus us. Then the next stage is categorization, put you into categories: black, yellow, red, brown, and black. Or if it was amongst the British, I was categorized, the English are at the top, Scottish, Welsh, then the Irish. So it's categorization. And then characterization, where you got lazy and careless and fickle and all these other type of things, our character, our personality. This is what philosophy was doing. And this is supposed to be a so-called biological paper or an anthropological paper. No truth to this at all, or hardly any truth to this at all, because who works harder than a slave? During the time we wrote this, Black people were slaves in the West. So how could they be lazy when they were making massive amounts of money? So when you got the book, which was written by, the name escapes me now, Wealth of Nations. I can't remember the author's name, it escapes me. But if you read the book carefully, you will notice that wealth was accumulated and made by dark-skinned people, free labor. They didn't pay us anything, they worked us to death. So what laziness is he talking about? We work from can't see in the morning to can't see at night, practically. Okay, during the daylight hours, we were overworked. 7 days a week, we didn't get a day off. So what laziness is he talking about? And this was to justify the slave trade. This was to justify the barbaric behavior that European planters and merchants, men of profession, were projecting towards darker-skinned people in the so-called Western world. And this is why this was all constructed, in order to justify, to make these people feel they're not doing anything wrong. They're not human anyway. Do you know that every 100 years in Britain, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year, they were debating, religious leaders were debating whether a white woman had a soul. This is what they were debating. This is the sort of debates they were talking about. So even though people were human beings, they were trying to dehumanize them. This is why they're so obsessed with human rights. They don't know what human rights is from a historical perspective. They still don't. And even though there's signatures to human rights, we see the violations that take place where dark-skinned people is concerned within a dual system. And what I mean a dual system, there's a system for whites in the legal system and a system for blacks. It will change, there's exceptions to the rule, but the rule hasn't changed since the 1500s. And this is what we have to try to explain and try to get people to acknowledge that these systems were created to work for the wealthy, rich, white men particularly. Then their wives who inherited that, to make sure they preserve that wealth. And then later on, it filtered down to the working class and the underclass of those societies. Black people was out of that equation. They came in much later. But then you started to see a stratification between black and white. And this is how this came about. This is all socially engineered during this period. And then if you want to look at Blumenbach, I won't talk too much on that. This is looking at the classification. So Linnaeus gave us 4 classifications of different races. And round about 1775, Blumenbach actually coined the term Caucasian. Okay, so that's where the term Caucasian came, a year before the Declaration of Independence was signed. The Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. In 1775, a year before that, this German botanist or naturalist, okay, he was the one which coined this concept Caucasian. And he believed that these people were the most handsomest or beautifulest looking people of the planet. So that's where the word Caucasian literally came from, to denote a white person who was pure, civilized, upwardly mobile, and every other good thing you can think about. So in the Americas, this is how white people were stratified. Because remember, the vast majority of white people that went to the Caribbean islands from the 1500s onwards, and those that went to places like Canada and America from the 15th century, from the 1500 onwards, they were stratified. So the first group of people at the hierarchical structure in the so-called New World was your planter, okay? The landlords or the people who were working on the farms, farmers who manufactured things, etc. That was the planter was, okay? He had big manors built on those plantations, which were built by slaves. It wasn't built by Europeans that was going over there. It was built by slaves, okay? And many of these slaves were builders back in Africa. They just went through two major empires, the Mali Empire and the Songhai Empire. You know about the University of Timbuktu and all this literature which is coming out. These were literate people. Let's make things clear now, okay? And they were stolen from Africa and brought to the New World in order to produce, you know, a massive amount of minerals and commodities and resources for European markets now, because the Moors, which controlled the North Atlantic, were no longer in power. And they saw the amount of wealth that was going in and out of the Iberian Peninsula, Northwest Africa. Europeans were watching this for about 800 years. 800 years they were watching this for. And that's what they wanted to take over. So this gives a historical context to how economy, commerce, trade, import, export comes on the scene now. This is what this does. So now you know the foundation of the economy, trade and commerce, commercial enterprising, etc., etc. So that was the first one. The next group of white people were your merchants. These are your slave catchers. These are people who were dealing with import and export. So the person who was pulled down in Bristol, Colston, he was a merchant. He was trading in slaves, okay, sometimes throwing them overboard. And what happened to him when he was pulled down and thrown into the harbor? He did exactly the same to Black people who were alive. And the outcry which came from the community for some statue, and a less outcry for what this man had done on his slave ship to dark-skinned people, was pushed to one side. But they say history repeats itself. I call it historical karma. This is what this is about. This is what this man did. He had caused misery to people's lives. So if these are the type of people we revere in our society, and what I mean by that, if these are the people we revere who are supposed to be amongst our best or your best, who is your worst? Would you ever think of putting people like Jimmy Savile on a pedestal or putting him in a town? No, but you put these men who did similar or even worse things than what Jimmy Savile is supposed to have done. And that is because what? What Asa Iliad says, there's something drastically wrong with an educational socialization process that leaves us ignorant of our past, strangers to our people. And that is what it is. You are ignorant of your past and you are strange to your own people. You're strangers to what your own people did in the past. We have to study to get a concept, because we are today where we are because of what happened yesterday. It's no accident. It's socially constructed. Okay, it's socially engineered. Then we have the men of profession. Men of profession, they were slave owners to some extent. They would send slaves out and whatever the case may be to come back with their wealth. But these were your educated class of whites. Remember, the top three were your minority in the so-called New World. They were government officials, your clergymen, lawyers, doctors, etc., etc. The vast majority that was over in the Americas were known as your subordinate whites. They were sometimes known as your white trash, your stinkers or your tinkers. This is what they were called. And there's a book which is known as White Trash. I think it's a book you should read to know what kind of contempt these people had before and during slavery towards poor white people in this country. After 1560, when the enclosure movements came about, and they started to privatize lands because they wanted those private lands to hold sheep, because there was an international market for wool and sheepskin. This is what it was about. That's what the enclosure movements was about in Britain. And as a result of the enclosure movements in Britain, people were evicted off their land and they were starving and they were seen as nothing. And then they came with vagrancy acts. It was a crime to be unemployed. If you were unemployed as a white working class person after 1560 in Britain, yeah, you were imprisoned. And then you were sent later on to the colonies to work off your indenturedness or to work off your servitude. This is how white people were treated in this country. And they were sent over the slaves. You know, when they gained hegemony over Northern Ireland, all those prisoners of war, what happened to them? You're not even taught this. They were sent to Jamaica and Barbados and Trinidad. That's what they were sent. And they were working alongside the so-called Negro slaves. This is history. Some people say, well, this is not true, etc. Where did they go? We have the documentation in the Caribbean islands of these Irish people, Welsh people, Scottish and English people who were poor, who were enslaved in this country. They were known as, it was called the white slave trade. And a sex trade came out of this. And you see these in your cowboy films, which are known as whorehouses, where white women from Britain were sent to these places and, you know, where they were being pimped out. Why don't people know this history? You know, it just amazes me. So you can see how the history intertwines and intermixes and intrinsically linked together. So atrocities that when Black people talk about, just know that not too far from those Black atrocities that took place on the plantations, those same atrocities were taking place amongst white people who they refer to as white trash and squatters. You know, squatters is a derogatory term. It's the opposite of standing. Yes, squatters. Not people who live in there. They're calling people a piece of, you can finish off the word. When you squat, people don't even understand language anymore. They're not studying history in a manner or in a way to understand what type of things meant back in that time and how we use, this is why I don't call myself a minority. I'm not minor. I'm not minor. That's what minority means. They got us believing that minority means people, yeah, with a small demography. This is a load of rubbish. This is not true. And history doesn't substantiate that. The word minority means minor, insignificant, a nobody, less than. That's what minor means. And we got minority and we're going to try to put it to numbers. They want to quantify this word. You know, who are they fooling? Not fooling me. And they're not fooling many of you. Many of you have come to that conclusion already. So the reality is we need to look at the wider picture, the atrocities that took place in this sense. Because if white people knew that Colston was deporting them, would they still want his statue standing up in Bristol? Because he was trading white people as well. But they seem to forget to tell the people that. But because the majority so-called people that were dark-skinned people, it undermines or floods the reality of white people, because a lot of them that worked on the ships were indentured slaves. Okay, they weren't free people. And many of them were taken to the Caribbean islands, had to work off, whether it was 5 years, 7 years, 12 years, or whatever the case may be. You had your subordinate whites. They were slightly educated, okay, but these are the roles they played. Accountancy, they were the accountants, bookmakers, bookkeepers, advisors sometimes. And then you had your white bond servants, who were your criminals, political prisoners. There were many of your Irish people that went over once Britain took Northern Ireland, your so-called thieves, people who worked on the land and they were kicked off and the enclosures came. And when they went back on the land to feed their family, they were now criminals. Vagabonds, you know, people just hang around, just not doing nothing, who were unemployed, and vagrants. This is British history. And this was now married into creating the slave system. So white people were the precursors to slavery, okay? This is important because you had a feudalism system which lasted for 1,000 years, 1,000 years. Most people don't even know that. before the enslavement. The reason why feudalism fell was because the transatlantic slave trade took it over. That's all. And I'll finish upon this and we'll have a little break. Okay, so the making of a race begins in the 1600s. So when they divided the people into race of white, yellow, red, brown, and black, what happened was after 1492, Spain and Portugal were the two superpowers. Okay, these Catholic states. And the Pope decided to split the world into two. He gave half the world to Spain and half to Portugal. Portugal ended up getting Brazil, Africa, and Asia. Spain ended up getting South America, Central America, the Caribbean islands, North America, Canada, Alaska, etc. They were Spanish territories. These two Catholic nations had hegemony over the globe because the Pope was the most powerfulest person in Europe. And then later on, Britain and France and Holland, yeah, and then you had German, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, Finland, and all these nations coming in. And they're all rushing down the Atlantic to try to develop it, to get their piece, to take from the Spanish and the Portuguese. And they're all fighting and they're racing down, okay, to develop the so-called New World. And then the word race, which means competition, was taken from these whites, sailors and pirates and voyagers and explorers, and then it was put on the different races of people they were encountering. Because what they noticed was when they went to North America, they noticed that the people were jet black to a tan brown to a reddish color. The same in Central America, same in the Caribbean islands with the Taino, the Arawak, and the Caribs. They were quite dark-skinned people. And a similar thing in America, reddish, okay? And then when they went to other places, they started to notice that people were like a yellowy color. So what they did, they put the word race on these 5 different color classifications or categories. And this is how they divided people up into the world because they had to trade with one another with these commodities. They had to. So if someone had monopoly over sugar or molasses and another one had monopoly over cotton, well, they'd have to trade these commodities with one another to benefit from either one of these commodities. And this is what they had to do because the Europeans were warring on the Atlantic for all this and they had to get together. There was all these councils that came together to stop them from warring. Look, we can share this, we can share all this together. And this is how this came about. Right. This is just a slave ship. So we're talking about how Africans were packed in slaves. Look at them, how they're packed in like sardines. These voyages were for approximately how long? Sometimes they lasted for 3 months, 2 months minimum if you had good wind. If you didn't, sometimes you'd be on the ocean for 6 months, 5 months, locked in that position, urinating, defecating, eating, crying, bleeding, sweating. Okay? This is about humanity. They say all lives matter. This is a slogan now, all lives matter. Did it matter then? Where's the evidence that it mattered then? Did it matter when the Native Americans were having their land taken off them and put into servitude and put into concentration camps? Did all lives matter then? Did all lives matter when the British took over the Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia and all these places where Aborigines couldn't even wear shoes legally in Australia till after 1969, the year I was born. That's why I know this date so well. It was illegal for them to wear shoes. This is our history. This is Western history. This is British history as colonizers as well. So what I'm trying to show you here, that we are intrinsically linked. So you can see how race as a social construct has characterized people to be inferior, superior. We are wealthy, you're poor. We are, and the list just goes on. We are the strong, you are the weak. We are the ones in control, you are the one who are not in control. And the list just goes on. And we'll finish on this one. We'll have a quick break. This here is images which are trying to show the British and American public that the way that blacks are being transported in the so-called New World is wonderful. This is propaganda. Blacks never came over like this. They were chained in. You can see there's an element of freedom and they're talking and they're sat there like it's a room. This is a Middle Passage. This did not happen. Okay? So we got to be careful of images. This is what I'm trying to say, because they had propagandists in those days who were trying to justify enslavement and dehumanizing people. And when there was an outcry in this country by white people in Wales and England, and they formulated the abolition movement, they had to create images like that to try to say, well, it's not that bad. So what we will do, we'll have a break. And then what we'll do, we will carry on the making of a Negro, making of a slave. We can see where the term Negro came from. We're going to look at certain other terminologies, etc. And then we're going to look at after the emancipation and when people became free. So if you want to have a break, say for 10 minutes, return back and I will continue. Thank you very much. See, when they took Indians from the Indian subcontinent, that indentured servitude did not apply to them. So we need to go a bit wider, and you need to understand that sometimes your skin color determined what indenturedness actually meant. And for the indentured enslaved, and many of them enslaved in Guyana, Jamaica, Barbados, they would testify that the way that white people were treated in the Caribbean islands as indentured servants was not the same way they were treated. So we have to have, you know, a more broader understanding of what indentured mean. And the color distinction, it does change, and it did change.
Hello, Abu-Bakr.
Yes,
Can I ask a question, please?
Yes.
If you can answer, I just wonder, is there anywhere, to the best of your knowledge, where these histories are being actively taught? And also, in your opinion, have they just been completely eradicated from all curriculum across the UK, to your knowledge?
Well, to say they've been eradicated from the curriculum meant they must have been in there in the first place. So they wasn't there in the first place. That's the first thing. Some teachers, when Black history is taught, there's only two things they focus on. They either focus on the civil rights that took place in America, or they focus on slavery. And they rarely focus on British colonization in the Caribbean. It's like the Caribbean and Britain had no relationship at all. So there is a problem where that is concerned. However, there are more white intellectuals who are males and females who are studying history in Wales and England. They're starting to see where their town or their city or their area was to some degree in relationship with the slave trade. And many of them have gone on to write books and trying to expose the links that Britain or Wales or England or Scotland had with the Caribbean islands or with North America. Some heritage in some museums, there are some groups to do with heritage. They will talk about these issues, etc. But this information is really scattered around. Is it, who am I speaking to? Sorry.
Cindy.
Oh, Cindy, yeah. So that's what happens, Cindy, if you look at it from that perspective, okay? So there is bits out there, here and there. It's like a jigsaw piece. And it's just which unit or which body is going to bring them together in order to join them, okay? Join them together so we can see the bigger picture.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, please accept my apologies. I need to leave. Okay, Dioch. Thank you, no problem. But the Indian indentured servants were able to go on to own businesses. So maybe they weren't treated as well. This is not true. April, I don't know where you got this information from, to tell the truth. I have interviewed and I've spoken to generations of Indian indentured laborers, and the reason why they end up getting business, etc., because they were used as a buffer group in the Caribbean islands, just like the British did in Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa. Okay, so they used a buffer group, etc., in order to make sure that Black people maintain a lower status within society. So there is a point what you're trying to make. I do understand it, but I have interviewed descendants of indentured laborers, and many of them were 2, 3, sometimes 4 generation indentured enslaved by the British. And they didn't always keep their promises, or you know, we do know that they broke treaties with the people, just like they did with us. You know, many of us went over as indentured, but we ended up becoming enslaved or stolen, etc. So it's not a picture in which it fits nicely. We need to look, they are corrupt people from amongst the plantocracy or the merchant class. Their concern is about making money. And when there was slumps in the economy, we started to know that indenturedness amongst white people intensified because there was a short labor, especially if you read any sort of information on the abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807. There was a labor shortage. So all indentured people on the island, okay, their indentured servitude was increased. This is a fact. Okay, so we have to look at these type of things when there's slumps in the economy, etc. Indenturedness did change somewhat.
Abu-Bakr, this is Jacqueline.
Hello, Jacqueline.
Can you tell me, you know the term divide and rule, did that start in the 1600s or was it before?
The divide and rule is traced back to Philip of Macedonia, which is Alexander the Great's or Alexander of Macedonia's father. So we're going back around about the 4th century BCE.
Right.
And then later on, it was adopted by the Romans because Romans inherited from the Greeks. And then that was obviously adopted by imperialists later on who adopted the Greco-Roman culture. Not necessarily the Judo-Christian culture, Judaic-Christian culture, the Greco-Roman culture. So it is as old as the 4th century BCE. So I hope I've answered that, Jacqueline.
You have, yes, thank you. I've also put on the chat about Stewart Hall. I had heard about him some years back.
Yeah.
Sadly, he died a few years back. I think about maybe 5 or maybe more years.
Yeah.
But he wrote a book called The Unequal Struggle.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
And I put that on the chat there for anyone else if they're interested to look into it.
Oh, that's cool.
Right, any other questions at all? Well, you have a break. Whoops.
I finally made it to you.
Are you, Layla, okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good.
My
good.
life's just been picking up.
Good,
which is
good.
I'll probably have to go again soon though, because my family will be back. So but I've been catching up with you on YouTube.
Okay, yeah.
Did you see it? Did you see it? I subscribed to you.
Right. So what we're going to do now, we're going to continue now, and we're going to be looking at what is known in sociological terms or circles as determinism. Okay, determinism. And what that basically is when somebody determines who you are. So you lose your identity. Someone actually formulates who you are as an individual or who you are as a group. And in order for that to happen, this is what took place during Africans people encounter during forced migration in the New World. So they had to change their language. They couldn't speak their language no more. And one of the measures that they used to do on the plantation was making sure they took people from different villages or different countries so they couldn't communicate with each other. And by doing that, they were able to establish less slave rebellions, okay, or insurrections or revolutions or whatever the case may be, okay, to stop their system that they have put into place from overthrowing. Religion was another thing which they had to abandon as well, okay. Their customs, dresses, one of the things which they would do was make sure that they brought them over butt naked, okay, to the Americas, male as well as female, babies, children, etc. So they had no identification with where they come from. And when they saw them coming off the slave ships, the people in the auctions, etc., they would have the perception that these people are savages, they have no clothes. So he was trying to reinforce what many of the men of professional, the intellectual class was trying to construct. They had to change their names. And if you look at Black people today in the West, they usually have British surnames, okay, and European first names. You will see this. They got names like O'Brien, they got names like Johnson, Jackson, you know, Phillips, Davis, Davies, Williams, all these surnames they have. And their names were forced to change their names. Their occupations may have changed. So we know that many scholars came in because we know there was a lot of Black people or Africans that came in who were able to read and write. So that wouldn't have gone on too well, but if they had to work on the plantation, then their professional occupation drastically changed somewhat because it was their labor which was owned. They didn't own their labor, they didn't own their family either. Relationships, another thing, which was socially constructed as well. You couldn't just go and marry whoever you wanted to marry, okay? Especially if the slave owner or the planter had his eye on the same woman that you wanted to be with. That was just a no-no. So we have to understand it was like a concentration camp. That is what a plantation was about. Every facet of a person's life was controlled. Every aspect of their life was controlled. Family identity, even where education was concerned. So that's just giving you elements of what had to change in order to create a Negro. Okay, so Negro is it's a socially constructed, it's like a Frankenstein individual. And this is why we abolished this term in the 1960s. So when we look at this identity, there's two types of identity we need to acknowledge. So you have individual. This is when people are able to construct their own identity without it being imposed. Okay, so it's bottom up. And this is referred to in sociological circles as internal definition. It's internally defined. I define who I am, not somebody else. A social identity, however, is pretty much the opposite. What other people see you as within a group context when they look at you as an individual. So they can see you as an individual within a group context. That's an external identity or an external definition, which would refer to as a social identity, but not all the time, because social identity could be a social role you play, like a mother, a teacher, you know, and all these other type of things, okay? Even though other people call you that, those titles which are given to you by others, you know, you do have some role to play in that, but it is limited to some extent, okay? And so that's how we understand the study of identity. So social identity refers to the characteristics, the behavior, okay, the attributes, yeah, that are given to an individual by others. And this is what Anthony Giddens says, who's a British sociologist. So this is just an example to show you in the last 5 centuries where Black people have not been able to define who they are. It's been defined by others, other people. So if you look here, we have Moors. That was defined by Europe. European is a Moor, the word Moor comes out of the European languages. Maurice or Moros, which comes from the Latin or the Greek, which means dark or black. That's what it means. But it has a positive connotation because of the civilization they built in the Iberian Peninsula, for example, okay? Then they were known as Morescos, like little boy, little Moor, okay? Then we were called Maroons. Maroons actually comes from a Spanish word, Cimarrone, or Cimarrones, I hope I'm saying it right, which basically means wild or untamed. It is attributed to an animal, okay? And this is how that came about. Then we started to see from the 1500s onwards, the term Negro being used. So these are all the different terms that Black people have gone through since 1492. Then the word Creole comes into play. Now, Creole is a French word, but it comes from 2 Iberian words, Criolulu or Criolola, which means native, which means a white person born in the tropics. That's what a Creole was. A Creole is a white person born in the tropics, not a Black person who speaks a pidgin language. That's what it became later on. Because when many of the white males were going over to the tropics, the Caribbean islands or North America, as an example, they did not take with them white women. Very little white women went there. So they were having children with Black women or what you call it, Caribs or Taino or whatever the case may be. And they became mixed up, and so Creole became associated with being mixed. Then we see colored, West Indian. So we can see all those different things there. So all those different things on the outside are things which are socially constructed by others. Black British, Afro-Caribbean. Yeah, we chose African Caribbean, not Afro. Okay, they chose Afro-Caribbean. We chose African. We want to be called by a continent, not what they call our hair. So we chose the African Caribbean, Africans from the Caribbean. And this was constructed in the about the mid 1980s. Before that, we referred to as West Indians. This is what we referred to, okay? The Black British. Okay, so what I'm trying to show you now is that in the last 500 years, Europeans have had a tendency in developing terminologies to put on us. Then later on, it was Black, and then it was a ethnic minority ethnic. Now it's BAME now, okay? They have a fascination in giving us different names. It's like we're not allowed to name ourselves. We're not allowed to put ourselves into category. They have to do it. We're no longer slaves. And this is what happens with this authoritarian personality, where groups of people feel because they're imperialistic or whatever the case may be, they have the right to determine someone else's life, their destiny, their image, how they're presented, etc. That's all this basically is, okay? And it is derogatory to a large extent because we're not naming them. They name themselves, but they want to name us. Just like when we came off slave ships, they couldn't say our names. They were giving us their so-called names. And it's now, we've got their names, they're even naming us again on top of it. So it's like we cannot name ourselves. So personal identity is self-identity. Yeah, sets us apart as distinct individuals. Self-identity, when you identify yourself, it refers to the process of self-development through which we formulate a unique sense of ourselves. And this is the difference between personal identity or social identity, or individual identity or social identity. How we define, how we construct ourselves is where that's important. This is what is important here. So this is how Black society was constructed or stratified within the so-called Americas. So for instance, you had the colored people, which is up the top. Then you had the three Blacks. These are people who were emancipated. And then you had the slaves. And the slaves developed into 4 different categories. So the first one were your mechanics. They were usually a majority. Your carpenters, your handymen, your builders, your blacksmiths, your silversmiths, your dressmakers, your tailors, all these different people known as mechanics. They were your majority within the Americas. But one of the problems is when you look at movies and films, they always like to focus on number 4, the field hands or the sugar boilers, the ones who work on the plantations. They were the minority. They were literally the minority if you're looking at demographic figures. So there's a sense within movies where they want to create the narrative and reinforce a narrative, which was not necessarily true, to try to demean us that we weren't in any capable position of having, you know, skills or unique skills to develop the so-called Western world. And that's what happens. So you have the mechanics, then you've got your domestic servants, which could be male as females, mainly females, who usually worked in the house, and they usually lived in the house, either in the basement or the attic. Okay, and then what happened was they were your cooks, your cleaners, your maids, your midwives, your wet nurses, carers, gardeners, okay, childminders, whatever the case may be. So they're your domestic servants. And the one which was on there as well was your comfort girls. These were your live-in women which were there to please a slave owner, okay? Because there was a sex slave trade taking place amongst Africans within the so-called New World. Then you had your headman, which was more of a privileged position. They were usually never really trusted, but they usually used to hear the information. So they would go from one plantation to another, sometimes in carts or coaches, or sometimes they had the privilege of overhearing, you know, different conversations between different planters or men of profession, and they would literally sometimes report that back to the field hands. But that was more of a privileged position, a headman. So it was a form of promotion. So what I'm trying to show you that within the slave society, there was 4 different categories in which Blacks fell into. So let me just move on. Whoops, we've had that break. Now what we're going to do now, we're going to look at North America and Britain. We're going to look at emancipation, abolition of slavery. So I'm just going to run through these. This is a coin that came out in the 1700s, okay? And it says, am I not a man and a brother? Because Africans by the 1700s and by the 1800s were not considered men. They were not considered human beings. Women were not considered females to a large extent, you know? They weren't considered human beings. So as far as humanity, and this is why there was this massive debate with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. One is talking about civil rights, how to be treated civilly in a white-dominated society. And Malcolm says, you cannot have civil rights unless you have human rights. We must make white people see that we are humans, because through history, they demeaned us. We were known as chattel slaves, where we get the word cattle, because when slaves came over, they were sleeping in barns with horses. Some people don't realize this. It wasn't a cruise ship, and they wasn't put into hotels. Okay, they were sleeping in barns, etc. Some slave owners didn't have slave quarters, and many of those slave quarters were created and built by the slaves themselves. And that was because they had those skills. They were carpenters and builders back in Africa, and that's how they were able to build those those houses on the plantation. But generally, their houses, they were sleeping in the barns with the animals. This is what it is. They were seen as non-human. And many of them are seen like that even till today to a large extent. So let's look at the abolition movement that spurts off, not just in America, but also in Britain, because Black people are now becoming free. They're writing books. Some of them are exposing their slave owners for the ill treatment in which they were having. Some of these narratives are bestsellers, okay? Negroes are now becoming educated to a large extent, because one of the first things which they wanted to do was fight for freedom so they could be educated. And then they were using their education to educate the rest of white society to the atrocities that were taking place that they were trying to overlook or trying to downplay. So these are some of the things that took place in Britain. So they boycotted sugar. So there was a sugar boycott in Britain up to a certain time, because people were seeing the conditions slaves were coming in. You had individuals like Thomas Clarkson. Thomas Clarkson, who was part of the abolition movement in the 1700s, would go to places like Bristol and Liverpool and London, and he would see the way that slaves were coming in. You can smell the vomit and the feces and the urine and the sweat, and the blood on these slave ships as they were coming in. The stenches in the harbors was totally disgusting and off-putting. And he was recording these things, and he was sending these records to the likes of William Wilberforce. The real hero, if we want to look at it, as far as the abolition movement is concerned, in British history, is Thomas Clarkson himself. William Wilberforce was the, he was the, well, not the senator, I can't remember what it is, like he was connected to Hull. I can't remember what you call him, but he was connected to Hull, okay? And then what happened was when Thomas Clarkson was feeding this information, he would intervene in Parliament and discuss some of these issues. And it took years for Parliament to acknowledge, because many of them were merchants and they had families who were planters in these countries. It wasn't in their interest to abolish a system which gave them that wealth and prestige. They weren't interested. So the reality is there was internal issues amongst white people. The consciousness of many white people in Wales and in England, in Scotland, came to the forefront, where they wanted to see this abolished. Only because the amount of free Black people that were writing novels, or basically writing their biographies, or having, biographies or autobiographies about their life as a slave, and they could not believe what was taking place. So many of them made concerted efforts in order to try to change things. So sugar was one of them. But obviously, we know about industrialization. Many of you probably didn't even know that the cotton was coming out of the southern states. So if Britain is supposed to abolish slavery and the slave trade in 1807 and 1833, why is cotton still being delivered after 1833 to this country? It's slave cotton. And people were wearing it, and it's being distributed, to other areas. So there's a contradiction. About abolition of the slave trade and slavery, which I will talk about later. So there's a link between North American slavery, the cotton mills of Lancashire and Manchester, okay? It feeds into the Industrial Revolution, yeah? The slave products, commodities, and resources that are being created over there is coming over and enriching industrialists and paying the working class within this country. So you can see how industrialization and enslavement is intrinsically linked. Okay, the slave trade was ended because sugar merchants in Britain lost a lot of money. So was British economy reliant on it. So you have to understand that for some people abolishing slavery, it was actually cheaper to grab and run, get as much as you can and run, because it was a failing economy now. Because what was happening was that it was equal opportunity distribution, and there was more and more people investing, and many people were losing investments because the economy was changing, because you moved from an agricultural revolution to an industrial revolution. More and more white people have now are working in industry, which means there's going to be less people working in the fields. And that is one of the reasons why it basically reduced or attenuated. Okay, it wasn't necessarily goodwill for many of them who decided to join abolition much later. It was to save their wealth. It wasn't because they woke up and had a conscience. For the ones who were there at the beginning, it was a conscious thing for them. But those later people who was resisting the movement only joined it in order to save their own butts or to save their own wealth. This is what it was about. Then we have the 1807 abolition of the slave trade, not slavery, to stop the transportation of slaves from the so-called old world, such as Africa, into the new world. So Britain decided to end slave trading in their colonies in the West Indies, and so did America. America ended it at the same time. So at the same time that Britain passes the Abolition of the Slave Trade Act, America does exactly the same thing. But there was other underpinning factors, such as the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution, they fought with France. For 12 to 13 years, they became an independent state in 1804. Do you know, in 1804, Black women in the West were the first people to vote a political leader in? White women didn't even get that until the 1920s. So in 1804, Black women in Haiti, in the Caribbean, the French-speaking Caribbean, once they kicked the French out and it became the first republic and a Black republic, and slaves who freed themselves, they allowed Black females to participate in democratic elections to elect their leader, which was Dessalines. And many of these Black females fought as well alongside men in the Haitian Revolution. So this is another picture. So the first women to vote in the Western world were Black women. This is historically documented. In France, because of the French Revolution, they didn't see vote until the 20th century. Nor did women in America, nor did women, obviously, in Britain. So when they produced the film The Suffragettes a few years ago, etc., Haiti should have been the first thing on there. Haiti wasn't even mentioned on there. And that's what happens. Yeah, there is something wrong with an education socialization process that leaves you ignorant of your past. They're ignorant of their past. So you don't even know the people. The people who through revolt and revolution that gained hegemony and control, and now they can self-define who they were and what they were for the future, is not recorded. And this is the thing. Even William Wilberforce himself was against the Haitian Revolution. And we need to expose William Wilberforce, even though he is known for contributing to the abolition of the Slave Trade Act. Yeah, he was against slave rebellions. We didn't wait on Parliament to want to pass things. We rose up in the Caribbeans. We rose up in North America for change, because freedom has to come from the people themselves. People cannot, and a person who's oppressed cannot give you your freedom. And if they do, it's only partial. It's only partial freedom or short term, or it has a shelf life of some type. So the reality is we need to look at the bigger picture. And when the Haitians kicked the French out, we started to see the Louisiana Purchase. They sold Louisiana and Mississippi to Anglo-Americans because it crushed the French economy. They say about 3/5 of French economy relied on Haitian sugar. That's why the French are very good pâtissiers, because you need sugar. There was supposed to be a lot of sugar going into France. That's why there's so much desserts in Britain and in France, because the amount of sugar which was coming over from the 1500s onwards. That's why you have a lot of cakes and, you know, sugar and all these other type of things. So we have to understand that. So we sold 2 major states to recover the French economy, Napoleon. And also the Sokoto Empire in Nigeria was formulated, which made it difficult for British, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Dutch, German, Italians, ships from penetrating, West Africa, because it's a Sokoto Empire. So it's not just abolition or what took place in Parliament that caused that. There was actually external elements by Blacks or Africans that caused the abolition of the slave trade to come about. But this is sometimes omitted from the book, or not even in there. It's not even in the literature. And people are made to believe that these people in Parliament got together and they woke up one day and decided to abolish it. No, it was external pressure, revolutions, plantations burning. So people were losing a lot of money. A lot of people were fleeing from these places because sometimes plantation houses or manors were burned to the ground. And many of them had to save whatever they can and come back to Britain. That was the main reason why they abolished it, but they allowed slavery to still continue. And the other thing as well, if you abolish the abolition of the slave trade, who actually benefits from it? The only people who benefited from it were the rich merchants and planters that were still engaged in the slave trade. Africans didn't benefit from it. Because why? You've got a labor shortage now. Because Britain still wants that same yield of sugar. If there's 20 tons of sugar coming over the year, they still want 20 tons to come in, even with a labor shortage. And this is the thing. Even though the governments of Wales and Britain, Wales and England and Scotland like to celebrate the so-called Abolition of the Slave Trade Act every year, the reality is they never tell you, that the slaves were worked to death, they were tortured, they were killed, there was a labor shortage, they still wanted the same yields, and they still enslaved them. They don't tell you this story. And you're given this array that everything is wonderful and they abolished it, etc. It didn't benefit us at all in the Caribbean islands. And it certainly didn't benefit Black people in the Americas because they passed the act at the same time. And I'm not going to read through it, but this is what intensified slavery. It was still in place. Slave conditions didn't change. Families were still being sold and broken up. Slave beatings intensified because they wanted to work. They wanted to get more out of them with less labor. Slave executions was regular. Rape intensified because they needed to produce the next slave population because they couldn't take slaves from Africa. So what started happening, girls as young as 8 to 9, when their menstrual cycle was started, they were sent to buck farms and stud farms. Read the history. And they were forced to breed the next generation. This is what happened. So this lovely thing that they like to tell us, that they abolished it in 1807, these are the horrific realities behind this. I'm not saying that the slave trade shouldn't have abolished, it should have, but slavery should abolish at the same time. But they kept it going until 1835. Actually, right up until 1963 in Jamaica, when they gained independence, or 62 when they gained independence. Because my grandmother, who was born in the 1800s, she told me herself, even though I only saw her for the first 7 years of my life, and this is probably why I'm a historian, she told me that she was a slave. So these acts that Britain was supposed to abolish in 1807 and in 1833 is just something on paper. It did not exist in practicality or reality in the Caribbean islands. And my grandmother herself told me before she passed away that she was a slave. So what about this act? What did they actually abolish? What did they actually abolish? And this is what I mean. We got to speak to the people. The problem with most of us, unfortunately, we don't interview people who come from who are the victims. We don't read books written by Black people because we feel they have nothing to say about their own condition, you know, and we have all these judgments about things. Let's look at the broader picture. When we look at the broader picture, we'll notice that there's nuances which are missing, which can connect those dots into something. Because what is said on paper doesn't necessarily mean it is an objective to change things on the ground. Because it doesn't. The piece of paper just says we're supposed to be doing this or we should do that. But is it actually established or brought about as far as change is concerned? And not necessarily. So these are just some of the things I just want to emphasize. So the Slave Trade Act, 1807, the abolition of slavery was supposed to take place in 1833, but it doesn't reach the Caribbean until 1834. Remember, there was no telecommunication then. People had to, you know, travel on ships, etc., for messages from Parliament to get to the Caribbean islands. Okay, in 1838, the plantocracy accepted it 4 years later. So even though Britain in Parliament said it's over, the plantocracy in the Caribbean didn't accept it. They still kept us enslaved. They still kept us enslaved. So just because something is written on paper doesn't mean it reacts in reality. And then I'm not going to read it all, but you can see that even after they abolished it, there was 581 slaves in Jamaica who still purchased their freedom, even though Parliament said they were free. And it was equivalent to £18,000 at that time, which is approximately 70 to 80 grand in today's money. That's how much we were worth. Even Andrew Jackson said 75%, once you have a slave to the land, it brings 75% profit to the planter. Andrew Jackson himself said this. That's why we're called contrabands, goods, commodities. It was a money-making thing. It wasn't, so, you know, that's what we came. We came with commodities and resources and minerals. That's how we were seen. And then you got the Code Noir with the French in 1685. It was supposed to give Black people in the French-speaking islands some sort of, what do you call it now? Some sort of ease in their system, but there was also other things to intensify the enslavement in those French-speaking islands. So here's the abolition of slavery again. You know, I won't read through that. I've given you some of that information there. I'm just wanting you to emphasize the hypocrisy that goes along with the abolition. But what I'll bring your mind to is the last one on here, which is reparations. Reparations was given to the enslavers rather than the enslaved. Approximately 20 million pounds, which is equivalent to 70 billion in today's money. And they only paid it off about 3-4 years ago. 3-4 years ago, they paid it off. So when Black people asking for reparations, etc., British people, unfortunately, and American people become antagonistic about it. Our grief is not with the working class, has nothing to do with them. It's with the banking institutions, Lloyds of London, Barclays, Rowntree's, Cadbury's. That's who our war is with for reparations, because they benefited. Those industries which we all buy, their chocolate and all these other things, they were involved in the slave trade, in the chocolate, in the sugar, and all these other things. That's who our grievance is with, because the free labor which was received for nearly 5 centuries, we haven't been given no payment at all. And the people who did no labor were compensated for the loss of goods, because that's what we were. 17 billion they paid. And you know that the British people didn't even know that. That's their history. That's their history. They didn't even know that until it came out recently. They didn't even know when it actually came out about 3-4 years ago, when they just finished paying it off. They started paying this as early as 1834, where they sent over 20 million on all the English-speaking islands, Jamaica, Trinidad, Barbados, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, St. Vincent, and all these other islands received this amount. And every colony in the Caribbean, whether it was Spanish-speaking, French-speaking, Dutch-speaking, their governments compensated and gave them all reparations. Every country, every white slave owner in the Caribbean received reparations from their government, not just the English. And that is why the Caribbean people are poor today. They haven't received nothing for their labor. And when people go over to holidays to these countries, do you notice similarities between the life of a planter and a visitor? You know, a person's going on holiday. It's similar. you stay there and you're looking at the natives and being looking after the natives. That's exactly what happened with the planters. That's where the industry came from, to live the life of a planter for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever the case may be, doing very little to enhance the country, to benefit the people. You're even told when you're buying anything, don't buy off the locals. Buy into these complexes, which comes back to Britain and France and Spain and all these other places that take place. That's what it's all about. It's about money making. The people in those countries don't benefit, really. I remember I was with the Jamaican minister on the BBC radio in 2012, and she told me, and she said to the person who's hosting the debate, she says for every dollar that is spent in Jamaica, I think is approximately 96 or 97 cents is taken out of the country. So 3 to 4 cents is left in the country. It's a money-making industry. This is why the mafia in America was upset when Fidel Castro kicked them out, because they couldn't exploit the people anymore. And the people which were fighting to get back in with the Bay of Pigs, etc., they were the landowners. The people which went to America, they were the grandchildren. They were the children and grandchildren of the slave owners in Cuba. Okay? They were doing business with the mafia and the American government. This is how corrupt the plantocracy is. So we need to look at the bigger picture and see that the modern construct of the country has some bearing and intrinsic relationship with what took place after the so-called abolition. And then we look at the American Civil War. Okay, we know that the North was trying to industrialize, etc. We know about the Confederate States. 11 Confederate States got together. They wanted to secede because they gave all these loans to America. They wanted to industrialize, and they wanted to take the Southern plantations. And the Southerners was not going to let them do that. And because they phased out slavery in the North, not because they woke up one day they were being good, it wasn't needed in that. It wasn't needed in that area. It wasn't needed. So what happened was a war ensued for approximately 4 years. Thousands of people got killed. And then they said it was supposed to be about slavery. It had very little to do with about slavery. It was about preservation of wealth, power, politics, law. That was the main thing, where Lincoln himself was saying he was trying to save the Union. Lincoln didn't give a damn about slaves. Even though he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, which he wrote and finished in September of 1863, if you read the Emancipation Proclamation clearly, it says that if any of you Southern states, your Confederacy, who seceded, okay, if you come back into the Union before January the 1st of 1963, okay, because this is in 1862, in 1863, of January the 1st, 1863, you can keep your slaves. You can keep slaves if you return back to the Union. But if you don't, your slaves is free. How can Lincoln free people in states that are in rebellion towards him? He didn't have that right. He didn't have that right at all. It was a strategic move. So when they say that Lincoln freed the slave, name me one. He did not free a slave at all. Okay, it's a whole thing on paper. This is propaganda. These are lies. He didn't. He didn't. And then when he did, and when Black people from the South was coming over to the North to help the Union, to fight the Southern states, what do they call them? Contrabands. Read the history books. That's what they called the Black Southerners that was coming over to help the Union, contrabands, commodities, goods. But wait a minute, Lincoln. I thought you said the Emancipation Proclamation said they were free. So why are you calling them contrabands? Goods, commodities. It's a lie that, the information is there in front of us, but we need to read beyond that. It's hypocrisy because it was a system intrinsically linked to development of the aristocracy who are now settlers in the so-called New World or in these new lands. Whoops, what's happened here now? Okay, so here this is just going on. So the American Civil War lasts from 1861 to 1865. There are 11 states seceded, which means they're in rebellion, which means that after the Civil War, according to the American Constitution, those Southerners should have been executed according to their law, but they didn't. Okay, and then we know about Gone with the Wind, which is a glamorization to some extent of the Confederacy, you know, where they literally sent poor white people. Rich white planters never went to fight this war. They sent poor white people to fight, okay, to preserve their property for them, okay? This is what really, really happened. And unfortunately, many of them were caught up in this. So yeah, so in 1865, the Civil War is over, and then they pass the Emancipation Proclamation, not Emancipation Proclamation, the Abolition of Slavery in 1865. That was passed. So what it says in 1865, that slavery will be held no more in the Union except as punitive punishment. And that's when the prison system begins. So when you look at the prison industrial complex, it dates back to 1865 to imprison dark-skinned people or Black people so they can have a free, cheap labor force. That's what it's about, the prison industrial complex. It dates back to this. 1865, because that's what it says. So when they abolished slavery, they put it within the prison system, and that's where it was. Then we started to see the things of the chain gangs and the fields workers and peonage and all these other words which comes with it. This is where they hid it. And during the time in 1865, radical Reconstruction, where Union soldiers went into the southern states for approximately 12 years to ensure that there's going to be upward mobility for Blacks who are now free, and to ensure that the southern states won't rebel against them. This is what radical Reconstruction was. And they confiscated land, the Unions confiscated land on those people who were known to be in rebellion towards the Union, okay? But what happened was, in 1877, many of the Union soldiers left, by I think it was 1877 when the last Union soldiers left. And it was after that, that's when problems really started for Black people. They started to throw them out of office as judges, as lawyers, as politicians. They wanted the South to come back. They decided that they weren't allowed to vote, even though voting rights was given to them in 1870. They refused to allow them to vote. Then they set up this concept of racial segregation, and we know how the history morphed into what it is today. So we can actually see the hypocrisy, what took place at that time, and the different types of name callings that was frequent during that period of not allowing these people to have a stake in a society in which they built. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop there a sec. I'm going to read some of these, what you call it, this chat, to see if anyone has said anything to me. No. I think you're just speaking to one another. Abu-Bakr has expressed the desire to be called as such repeatedly. Oh, someone's talking about my name. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Thank you. Let's have a look. What are your thoughts about the reparation movement, and are you part of any? This is April. No, I'm not part of the reparation movement. However, I'm not part of the reparation movement per se, but I think if Europeans or British people was able to get compensation reparations for doing nothing, for not working the land, I believe those people who didn't get paid for working the land should get paid, and they should be reparated. Reparation doesn't have to be financial. Reparation just means to repair the damage. And if we are at the bottom of the economic ladder, we need money in order to build our own institutions, because all the institutions that were built in America or in the Caribbean were built for white people or for British or for Europeans. And then when we try to build our own, etc., with what little handouts which was given to us, okay, they couldn't be sustained, unfortunately. But we should get paid reparations. I believe we should get paid reparations. And I don't think this is a debate for working class people in Britain. This is a debate between us and institutions such as Lloyd's of London, which the first thing they traded on was bonds. This is where we get the word bondage of Black people, okay? So we indict them first. That's how they made their money. When you look at the likes of Alexander and David Barclay, which created Barclays Bank, they were slave traders and merchants who used their money to set up banking institutions. That's what our powers with. Roundtree's, Oates, Scottish Oates, and all those organizations that were part and parcel of the enslavement period. That's who we are asking for reparations from, because they used our products, our labor, to create these massive companies or organizations for investments or for profits. So that's what I say about that. Thanks, April. I hope I've answered your question. Okay. Cindy, okay, thank you. Yeah, that's right. My name is Abu-Bakr. Okay, we should try to remember people's names. We shouldn't try and shorten them. This is a valuable resource that details some of the payments. Can you search by place? Several slave owners from Cardiff received payments, etc. Okay, and someone's put a link there. Brilliant, brilliant. So people are, stipulating certain things. Well, thank you, April. Yeah, you've apologized, so thanks. And thanks, Mark. Thank you very much. I'm glad you resolved that. Brilliant, brilliant. So yeah, I hope I've answered some of your questions. Bank of England were also part of this, I believe. Jacqueline says this. Yes, that's true. As soon as you see banking institutions emerge after 1500, guarantee they're involved with enslavement. The Bank of England, Lloyds of London, Barclays Bank, HSBC, which changed its name later on, all of them were part of the reparation payments for people like, for a lot of those people in the Caribbean, a lot of those aristocrats in this country, and many of those MPs who bought political power. Okay, many of those MPs who bought political power were from slave-owning families. They were not politicians by birth. They bought political power. Okay, I'm not going to name some of those names, but they are descendants of people who were slave merchants and slave traders who then bought political power for their sons and daughters to go into politics, mainly their sons to go into politics. So that's how that comes about. Thank you. So I hope I've answered your questions. Thank you very much. And keep the discussion going. So all I'm trying to do here is just to give you some context to history and why Black people are at the bottom of the social ladder, even in the 21st century, where people have been telling us for the last 10 years that racism has ended, racism is no more, yeah, that we've gone on with things, let's leave things in the past, yeah. While you're in the driving seat, we must leave things in the past. Oh, that's wonderful. It's like saying to somebody who starts off a couple meters before someone else and he wins the race, that we should just get over it. No, you're supposed to start on the same line and you're supposed to finish whenever, whoever's faster. If someone has 2, 3, 4, or 500 years economic head start, you cannot tell those people who are 3, 4, 500 years behind for them to just get on with it, leave it in the past, because they are living that past in your presence. And in your presence, it's unfair to say this. It really, really is. And we have to be more merciful when we're looking at these debates. These debates are 500 years old. Not something we'll just look at the last 20 years and then let's just deal with things, because it's affected families. We know about intergenerational trauma, okay? We know about these things. Yeah, my grandmother herself said she was a slave from Jamaica. She was born in the latter part of the 1800s. She don't even know what day she was born because you didn't record them. The only time you recorded them, then there were goods and properties on plantations. But as soon as they had so-called freedom, and they still wasn't allowed to read and write, they couldn't have records. So my grandmother don't even know when in the 1800s she was born. I think it may have been the latter part, either the 1880s or 1890s, but she herself told me she was a slave. So they didn't abolish anything as far as I'm concerned. Well, not for where she was concerned either. She worked for rich white plantation owners. And when she came to this country in the 1950s, she was working as a maid. That's all she knew. And she worked hard and sent for my father to come over here, who became a multimillionaire, and the story started to develop. But they had a richness within themselves, those Windrush generations who came over here, to instill something within themselves and to instill something into their children. Out of my grandparents, out of 4 of my grandparents, only 1 could read and write. The other 3 were not allowed to read and write. This is under British occupation. when we need to expose Britain. So they have never been interested of educating us when we were under them, or now we're supposed to be their equals. So when we see the amount of children which are kicked out of the educational system, we have to know they've never been interested in educating us. We were never there for that purpose. We were here to work. We were brought over during the Windrush period to work. And when we were taken from Africa to go to the so-called New World, to the Americas, or to Central America, or to all these other countries, we were there to work, not there to live, not there for education, or to benefit for the fruits of our labor. And that's the reality. And I think the more this is taught, is the more people will accept the wrongs of the past so they can try to mend it. Okay, because there's some people who will live in the reality of the past today where they're still socially deprived, economically exploited, socially degraded, with these unfair contingencies coming from people from the dominant culture because they're in a state of privilege. And this is not fair. You know, a privileged person needs to recognize where they got their privilege from and use it for the benefit, not for themselves, of others. This is what it's about, because that's what education and socialization is supposed to teach us, for us to be better individuals so we can improve the condition of our people, our community, our society, and so on and so forth. And that's being charitable. That's what it means. So here I'm just going to touch upon these things and I'm going to end it here because I think I've just done just over two hours then. The making of white supremacy. I just want to say this is an important factor, that the concept of white supremacy was coined by white people themselves. So when Europeans or white people hear this concept of white supremacy as an example, Black people didn't coin it. It was coined in 1865 when the Ku Klux Klan, which was founded by Albert Pike, this individual here was a Freemason. So it was the Freemasons, okay, help, support, and assistance that created the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, that's what Albert Pike was. Okay, and these people who came part of the Ku Klux Klan were disgruntled and upset Confederate soldiers who came back after the Civil War. They just lost the Civil War with the Union. And all of a sudden, their so-called property are now free because of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, or the abolition of slavery. And now they did not want to see themselves on equal power with Negroes or their former slaves. So they constructed the Ku Klux Klan. Ku Klux Klan comes from a Greek word which means a circle. A clan, a circle of clan, a clan circle. That's what it basically means. Okay, a circle. And you know about what they have done and how they've been supported by the federal government. The Ku Klux Klan was born in 1865 and is still in existence today. They're a terrorist organization which has been backed up by the American government, okay, even till today. They are still allowed they're still allowed to exist in places like Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, yeah, and all these other southern states. And it's moved into places like Indiana, it's gone more north, it's gone more west to California, Los Angeles, and all these places. It is a global phenomenon. So when we talk about white supremacy is a global problem. It's not a local or national problem. It's beyond that now. It's a global problem. Okay, and this is what needs to be, because they're still in existence today. And I think this is something I feel that sometimes people don't realize, that the Ku Klux Klan, they came into fruition in the 1800s, and that white supremacy is not a term that Black people use. This is what they used, of being white supremacy is about white people being superior over Blacks. This is how this came about. So let's have a look at some of the things with the Ku Klux Klan. Okay, so Ku Klux Klan believe in hegemonic structures. They believe that whatever structural system is out there, they have to control. Education, entertainment, economics, labor law, politics, war, religion, sex, whatever the case you can think of, whatever institution you can think of, they believe they should have ultimate control. And if they have ultimate control, people who they consider desirables should be either restricted or excluded. Okay, they should be restricted or excluded, which basically means restricted means they can only go so far which they're going to hit the concrete ceiling or the glass ceiling. And to be excluded means they cannot be a part of this organizational system. That's what white supremacy means within the concept of group closure. Group closure, close your group. You have to have certain characteristics to be a member. Okay, resource allocation. So what happens now is that resource is unevenly distributed. This is what it means, unevenly distributed. And then what happens is when people say, well, how come this group of people can have businesses and you don't? Well, what do you expect? There's hegemonic structure in play. We are either restricted or excluded from upward mobility. So when resource allocation is given to one particular group, because some people like to put, you know, brown, yellow, reds, and blacks in the same boat, as if they had the same historical experience. This is untrue. This is totally unfair. Okay, we have to know that. And like someone mentioned earlier, and I agree with her, she talked about, you know, a certain class was being used as a buffer group. She was right. Okay, she was right. They were used as a buffer group in order to maintain hegemony, control, all the what do you call it now? That personality. Okay, that personality, that authoritarian, that's it, authoritarian personality. Okay, where you have hegemony, control, authority over people, people's lives, people's decisions, and the list just goes on. Inheritance must come back to those people, which means that there's a lack of inheritance, that people don't inherit anything from the state, from institutions, they don't benefit from their own labor. And this is what group closure means, whether the Ku Klux Klan is, or what white supremacy is. Because white supremacy is not necessarily a thing where people put on, you know, cloaks and things to hide themselves. You know, it's an ideology, it's a system of principles, okay? It's a system of principles that exist in all countries. It's a global reality. That's what is a global reality. Africa's being plundered, you know, Asia's being plundered by a certain group, and they want to make sure that these multinational and transnational corporations that are only controlled by a certain ethnic group within these countries, within these borders, to maintain control, hegemony over resources, minerals, and commodities of other people's lands and other people's countries. And that's what it's about. So it's looking beyond the local and national perspective. You've got to see it as global. And we see that since 1945, we've seen the United Nations. We've actually seen the Trilateral Commission in 1972, when that came about, World Bank, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and all these are all European structures to maintain hegemony and control over the world. This is what it's about. It was born in 1865. If you put the pieces together with Freemasonry and all this rest of it, it's clear. I'm just giving you a little snippet. And I can give you in emails all the books where all this thing is mentioned. And some people have whistleblown what has taken place, even with the British aristocracy during the 1900s, like Milner, and you've got the likes of Cecil Rhodes, and all these other groups of people were doing a similar thing themselves. They all collectivized to ensure they had a hegemony and control over the world, over the globe. So it moved from local to national, now to international, what we now can call globalization. The other thing is looking at blood ties, lineage, and consanguinity. And that's basically looking at blood relatedness. So they don't like things with race mixing. It's about blood purity. Okay, this is what it's about. So they're totally against mixed race marriages, mixed race children, and all these other type of things. They see as a form of contamination within society. This is why children who come from this progeny are never half white, because white is considered pure as an element of purity. They're always the other, mixed race, Creole, black, colored, half caste, biracial, all these terminologies, even black, all these terminologies, without whiteness being in there at all, even though they have 50% of that in their DNA and in their genes. So this is white supremacy. This is how it manifests itself globally in the most pervasive form of nuances that you can think of, which is sometimes overlooked by us as individuals. Okay, then we look at the black codes and slave codes. So the black codes is what, after 1865, what the Ku Klux Klan wants to bring back in, the black codes. The Black Codes was basically based upon the slave codes to put dark-skinned people in servitude so they can control them and maintain hegemony over them so they can go about their business, because they did not see them as human beings or on equal par with themselves. Okay, and there we have the element of scapegoating. So scapegoating here, the scapegoating is common when two deprived ethnic groups come into competition with one another for economic reward. So if you look at the majority of the members of the Ku Klux Klan, they were from who? They weren't from the aristocracy. They were known as the poor white trash. That's what they were known as. You know, I'm sorry for using these terminology, but that's what they were known as. They were the poor. They were the ones who were in and out of work. They were the ones who were struggling, just like many of those Black people. But they didn't, because they were seen as the same as them, they wanted to join this movement in order to maintain power and hegemony over that. They didn't want to be associated with that. This is why they hated the concept redneck, because redneck constituted a concept that your neck would burn if you were in the sun for too long, meaning on the plantation. And that job was relegated to just dark-skinned people, or what was known as slaves. I'm going to be showing some images. This is far away, but you can see the amount of people there that's come out for the lynching. You can see where this person has been burnt, hung, strung, hung, not even quartered yet, okay? And they're all wearing white. And those of you who know your history about white in North America know that this is what you wore as a form of purity when you went to church. So this was after the church meeting. They all came out. They would put on extra trains for this to happen. All these things were staged in a sense. They would pick someone for whatever reason and they would enjoy this. This was a family event. And next week, I'm going to be looking at certain images. I'm going to show you things within those images you may not have seen before. This is a professional photo taken by a journalist. Policemen were there. Okay, it was a system. The American government did not want to intervene in this. And I will talk about Ida B. Wells, a Black woman who took her children on her campaigns when she's been threatened by the Klan because she was speaking out against lynching. Even when Billie Holiday wanted to sing the song Strange Fruits, they never wanted to hear it, but they were still sending these things in postcards. Yeah, she sung a song called Strange Fruit. They wouldn't allow her to sing this on television. You know, so we have to understand the reality of American society, you know, of why things are the way they are today and why there's so much contention between the races. Even though there's more mixed race children, there's more exogamy or mixed marriages than ever before, etc., these images still exist. These practical beliefs still exist, and it hasn't gone away. And it will never go away until the people face these realities. This is something that we've done. We saw it as acceptable. We saw it as normal. We now have to see it as unacceptable and abnormal. And we have to try to repair the past. So I'm going to leave it there. I hope you've enjoyed my presentation. You can stay on if you want. I'll answer some questions. For those who want to go, you're welcome to go. I will upload this onto YouTube. It should be on YouTube by Monday, this presentation. And thank you very much for attending. For those, if you feel I've offended you, I wasn't here to offend or anything like that. I'm very passionate about this, and I'm just giving things from a historical perspective for you to understand, you know, what was taking place at the time. Sometimes I went into character to speak on behalf of those slaves or Black people that lived in the 1700s and 1800s. I went into character in order to speak, to give realism, okay, to that reality, to try to speak that language, you know, of what was on their mind or in their heart when these atrocities or realities existed at their time. So thank you very much for all of you that turned up. Stay on. I'll answer questions. I'll see what's in the chat box now to talk about. And like I said, please come for next week. Next week's session will be a little bit later because I got to go to a screening, a documentary I was in. But please, what you call it, yeah. So please join me for next week. It's going to be the last section. And I don't mind criticism. I'm here to learn as well as teach. And thank you very much. And if anybody wants to open up their microphones to ask me a question, they can do. And if any of you've written any questions in the chat, I will respond to you with those, with the answers. Thank you very much. Any verbal questions at all, anybody? Okay, let's have a read. I look forward to this every week. I learn so much. Thank you, Abu-Bakr. So thank you, Timothy, if you're still there. Mark, thank you as ever. You're a devout follower in a sense of following the information, not following me, following the information, etc. You always contribute and you clarify things, etc. So thank you very much, Mark. Amina, thank you as well. Amina, you've come every week. I'm glad that you've benefited from these sessions, etc. You've learned something. I've also learned things from you, from some of the questions you've asked, because sometimes not until people ask questions that you begin to realize how much you actually know. Delivering is one thing, but it's the question time which is crucial, because then you realize what you actually know or what you don't know. So thank you very much for that, Amina. April, what documentary are you in? Oh yeah, I sent, if you got the link, April, the documentary is on the link which I sent. It's called Wales Untold. It was a documentary which I did about 4 or 5 years ago with a lot of other academics. We looked at Cardiff and Newport, and we looked at Black history, which began at the beginning of around about 20, 30,000 years ago in Britain, right up to the contemporary, which was, I think it was 2015 or 16. That's going to be shown in Newport. You can get the link on LinkedIn, not LinkedIn, it's on Eventbrite. Yeah. If you want to join, come and join and watch the documentary and listen to the debates. It was actually done by Black kids, about between 7 and 11 of them that came from Newport, who did the filming. They went to university, they learned how to ask questions, etc., because they didn't know much about their locality. And we basically focused on Newport and Cardiff. So I hope, April, that answers your question. And thanks for the, everything that you've, you've said to me, etc. Brilliant. I've learned a lot from you as well. I have to go back and revise a few things, etc., for clarification purposes. And like I said, I'm here to learn. Thank you very much. Thank you, Liz, as well. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. Does anybody want to say anything before I switch off verbally?
No, that was great. Thanks very much.
Okay. Anybody else? I'm going to stay on for 5 minutes, just in case somebody wants to say something at the end. Another one here, will I be sharing last week's session? I am so sorry that I missed that. Yes, I will put that on YouTube. Both recordings should be up by tomorrow. Last week's session and this week's session. The unfortunate thing about last week's session, which is probably the best part, the last half hour, 45 minutes, I forgot to press record. So I've shortchanged those people who wanted to see maybe that particular part. So thank you very much. Right, okay then, I'll leave it there, guys. I don't think there's any more. Will you be sharing? I think that's it. Okay, so I'm gonna go now. I hope you have a good weekend. Return back to work or school or college, whatever you've come from and whatever you'll be going to. Thank you very much. Anybody want to say anything before I go? No? Okay. Right. I shall see you all then next week, hopefully. Thank you very much for coming. Bye-bye now.